Get ready, get set, get nervous. On the Anatomically Correct World of Anatomy Program 3, we're going to take you on a fun-filled tour of the human nervous system. We'll check out the central and peripheral nervous systems and all the tissues that keep them connected. You'll also learn about the brain, spinal cord, and much, much more. So sit back, relax, and let the standard deviants teach you about your nerves without getting on your nerves. On the Anatomically Correct World of Anatomy Program 3.
Okay, step right up, folks. It's time for our pop quiz. Which vegetable does the human brain resemble most? A, spinach. B, eggplant. C, cauliflower. D, asparagus. Stay tuned and ready to the answer after the show.
Here's the long and short of our program. We'll start out with an introduction to the nervous system and learn about nervous tissue. From there, it's a quick jump over to the central nervous system, where we'll study the structure of your brain and spinal cord. Next, it's on to the peripheral nervous system, which has two main divisions. We've got a lot to cover today, so let's get the ball rolling. Your nervous system is the communication center of the body. This precision instrument controls things through three basic steps. First, your body gathers stimuli from the outside world and inside your body through millions of tiny receptors. Second, your body processes all this information and decides what to do. Third, your body responds in some way. Say you're walking down the street, minding your own business, when suddenly a crazy man jumps out in front of you and starts dancing. Well, you're not crazy, so you join in, all thanks to your nervous system.
Look it down! Look it down!
How did this happen? Well, your body received outside stimuli and rushed it to the command center. The command center decided on the best course of action and sent a message to your muscles. And your muscles went to work.
Look it down!
We'll split up the nervous system into two broad parts, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system, or CNS, is your brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system, or PNS, is everything else. It's all your nerves and stuff, and your eyes, your ears, and your tongue. Basically, the PNS is the link between you and the outside world. Now, to understand the grand scheme of the nervous system, you first have to understand the little itty-bitty parts. What are these itty-bitty parts? Nerve tissue. There are two types of cells that make up our nerve tissue, neurons and supporting cells.
Neurons are large complex cells made up of a cell body with outreaching extensions, or processes. The cell body is like a base, an anchor for all the extensions. Every neuron has two different types of cell extensions coming out of its cell body. These extensions are the axon and the dendrites.
The axon is a single extension which can vary in length. The axon conducts impulses away from the cell body of a neuron and towards other cells. Dendrites are short, thick, branched extensions of the cell body. The dendrites receive and conduct signals toward the cell body. So, while the axons conduct impulses away from the cell body, the dendrites conduct impulses towards the cell body.
Also, remember that most mature neurons can't undergo mitosis, meaning they can't reproduce. That means they can't be replaced if they're destroyed. So be careful. Brain damage is irreversible. Now, the supporting cells are a whole different can of worms. The supporting cells are different from neurons. First off, the supporting cells are non-excitable, meaning they do not conduct impulses. Also, there's a lot more supporting cells in the body than neurons. In fact, there are 9 times more supporting cells than neurons. Yep, these babies comprise the bulk of nervous tissue, so they're real important. They basically support the neurons. If neurons are golfers, supporting cells are caddies. Now you can concentrate on learning about the anatomy of the two major parts of the nervous system, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system.
We'll kick it off with the central nervous system, whose two components are the brain and the spinal cord. Let's begin with this little guy right here. Anatomists argue all the time about how to divide the brain up in order to name it. Well, you can argue from today till tomorrow that no matter how you divide the brain up, the major structures within the brain remain the same. So for the sake of convenience, we've divided the brain into four major regions: the cerebrum, the diencephalon, the brainstem, and the cerebellum.
Hello, I'm Ephraim Fotis, brain surgeon. The cerebrum is the biggest part of your brain, and it's the part we all recognize. In fact, it's kind of like this cauliflower that is here in my hand. Your cerebrum is separated into two parts, two hemispheres, as we like to call them in the brain surgery field.
Each hemisphere contains several things we call lobes. You've got your frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe. These guys are named for the cranial bones that cover them. You know, the skull bones. Don't get too stressed out about all of these names. Just know that each cerebral hemisphere contains several lobes. Now, some more fascinating facts about the cerebrum.
The cerebrum is highly convoluted. This means it has tons of folds and curves. These folds and curves are made up of elevated ridges of tissue called gyri and shallow grooves called sulci. One of the major areas of the cerebrum is the cerebral cortex.
The cerebral cortex is a thin layer that covers the cerebrum. The cerebral cortex is made up of something called gray matter.
Ah, yes, the cerebral cortex. It's sort of the top layer of the cerebrum that covers all the lobes. The cerebral cortex helps us engage in all sorts of conscious behavior. Things we can control, like communicating, remembering, understanding, and moving our skeletal muscles, like if I was dancing.
The next major part of the brain is called the diencephalon. Though the word diencephalon sounds like a dangerous space weapon or a Greek deity, in actuality, it is a dangerous space weapon. Actually, it's the core of the brain and is surrounded by the cerebral hemisphere. It consists of three regions: the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the epithalamus. All of these regions surround the third ventricle, one of several fluid-filled cavities inside the brain, which is also known as a dangerous space weapon.
The diencephalon is wedged up here, safe and snug between the two hemispheres of the cerebrum. There now. Here we go. Here we find the thalamus and its two buddies, the hypothalamus and the epithalamus.
The thalamus is a solid egg-shaped structure that makes up about 80% of the total mass of the diencephalon. So you could say it's pretty big. The thalamus serves as a sensory relay station to the cerebral cortex. Without it, our five senses would be useless.
The epithalamus is posterior to the thalamus. It's involved in the regulation of the sleep-wake cycle because it contains the pineal gland, which produces the hormone melatonin.
The hypothalamus is just below the thalamus.
Is the hypothalamus important? Well, why don't you be the judge? The hypothalamus is responsible for controlling the autonomic nervous system, which we'll talk more about later. This means that the hypothalamus indirectly regulates heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, digestion, hormone release, hunger, thirst, emotions, and the libido, or sex drive.
Next, we have the brainstem, which is this stalk part of our cauliflower.
The brainstem helps out by controlling the heart rate and respiratory rates. It also houses the visual and auditory reflex centers that help us see and hear.
The brainstem is made up of three different regions: the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata.
The midbrain is a short area located directly below the diencephalon, which you just learned about. The pons, meaning bridge, is inferior to or below the midbrain. And finally, the medulla oblongata is the section of the brainstem that is furthest down and blends into the spinal cord at the base of the skull. It also makes a great song lyric.
There's one more major part of the brain. That's the cerebellum. It's located in the back of your brain, under the cerebrum, and behind the diencephalon, right about here.
The cerebellum's work occurs subconsciously, which means we're not even aware that it's happening. The cerebellum helps us coordinate the movements of our skeletal muscles, so it's responsible for our balance.
You might also want to take a look at a structure that's contained inside the cerebellum called the arbor vitae. If you make a sagittal cut through the cerebellum, which is a vertical cut that divides it into two halves, you'll see a bunch of white branches.
These white branches are extensions of the myelinated axons in the white matter of the brain. The patterns these extensions make are called the arbor vitae. Arbor vitae means tree of life, but only its really close friends call it that.
Oh, there's one more tricky thing you should learn about the cerebellum. Even though the word cerebellum means little brain, the cerebellum actually makes up 11% of the total brain mass. It's the second largest region in the brain after the cerebrum. So commit that to memory, and you'll know all you need to know about the brain. The cerebellum, the cerebrum, the diencephalon, and the brainstem, they work together in perfect harmony.
I'm Dr. Edward Fotis, brain surgeon. Good day. Hey, the brain sounds pretty complex, but delicate. Doesn't it have some kind of protection?
The brain does have three forms of protection: the skull, the meninges, and a liquid cushion called cerebrospinal fluid.
The meninges are made up of three connective tissue membranes. These membranes cover and protect the structures in the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord. The three meningeal layers, from the outermost one to the innermost one, are the dura mater, the arachnoid, and the pia mater.
Just like the land of the free, the brain needs protection. And these three meningeal layers we have are perfect for the job. And so, I give you the dura mater, the arachnoid, and the pia mater. The dura mater, translated it means tough mother. It's leathery, double-layered, and surrounds the entire brain. It also anchors the brain to the skull to limit movement. The dura mater, without it, the brain would be as defenseless as the Swiss.
Qu'est-ce que c'est avec vous? Laissez-nous tranquilles.
The arachnoid is the middle membrane. It's made up of loose connective tissue membrane and contains web-like extensions. That's how it gets its name. It's spidery, web-like, and wily. The pia mater is known as the gentle mother. The pia mater is the innermost layer. It is heavily invested with small blood vessels and clings to the brain surface. It is very dainty and delicate. The pia mater has no business being in the army.
Cerebrospinal fluid also protects the brain and is amusingly nicknamed CSF. CSF is a fluid found inside ventricles, which are cavities in the brain. It's also found in between the arachnoid and the pia mater. CSF cushions the brain, gives it buoyancy, buffers it from trauma, nourishes it, and removes waste products.
So, those are the many defenses the brain has for protection: the skull, the three meningeal layers, and CSF.
For those of you who want to study the electrical activity of the brain, why not try electroencephalography, or EEG? This is the tool doctors use to measure the electrical activity of brain waves. It's usually used to study sleeping disorders and epilepsy, but you can use it to explore the brain in the privacy and comfort of your own home.
Really?
No, probably not. The machines cost thousands of dollars, but you could sneak into a hospital and use one.
Even the bravest of soldiers fear a traumatic brain injury. These horrible injuries are the result of a direct blow or when the brain ricochets against the skull. There are two common types of brain injuries: concussion and contusion.
Concussions involve minor damage to brain tissue that doesn't result in permanent damage, but can cause dizziness.
Contusions involve tissue destruction and can cause permanent neurological damage. So let this be a lesson: wear your Army helmet at all times.
You should also be aware of a number of degenerative brain diseases, which are long-term disturbances in brain structure and brain function. Two serious degenerative brain diseases are cerebrovascular accidents and Alzheimer's disease.
Cerebrovascular accident is another word for stroke, or when a circulation blockage causes a lack of blood to the brain. This results in a condition called ischemia. Ischemia eventually results in the death of brain tissue.
Alzheimer's disease results in dementia, a breakdown of mental processing. This is a progressive degenerative brain disease, which means it gets worse over time. Tragically enough, The effects of brain diseases are irreversible because the neurons that make up the brain do not regenerate.
So now that the brain is our close and personal friend, let's move on to the second part of your central nervous system, the spinal cord. The spinal cord runs through the trunk of your body. It's about 17 inches long and runs from the large opening at the base of your skull here all the way down to the first lumbar vertebra. For those of you who love names, the skull opening is called the foramen magnum, and the end of the spinal cord is called the conus medullaris.
Now, is your spinal cord just flapping around in your back when you're moving and grooving on the basketball court? No. Your spinal cord has a bony covering called the vertebral column. It's kind of like your brain with its bony covering, the skull. And, just like your brain, your spinal cord is protected by cerebrospinal fluid and the meninges.
You'll remember the meninges from your skull. Meninges are connective tissue membranes. The spinal cord is protected by the same three meningeal layers of the brain, the dura mater, the arachnoid, and the pia mater.
Those aren't the only things that keep your spinal cord from flopping around. No, sir. Check this out.
Your spinal cord basically ends here in the lumbar region, but an extension of the pia mater runs all the way down here and attaches to your coccyx. This helps anchor the spinal cord to your skeleton. So, what does the spinal cord have to do with the nervous system? Well, as part of the central nervous system, it links the brain to the peripheral nervous system. How? Well, you've got a lot of nerves coming out of your spinal cord, particularly at these two places where it's enlarged, here and here. The nerves that serve your upper limbs originate up here, and the nerves that serve your lower limbs originate here. So the spinal cord is kind of like a relay station for reflexes and other impulses. It receives information from your body and passes them over to the brain. It also receives messages from the brain and passes them to the body. The spinal cord takes care of some of the incoming messages itself without a lot of input from the brain. We'll get into more of this shortly.
So, that's the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord. Now let's push on and bravely meet the second major part of your nervous system, the peripheral nervous system.
Like we said before, the peripheral nervous system's main job is to link the body to the central nervous system. It accomplishes this job using two subdivisions, the sensory, or afferent division, and the motor, or efferent division. We'll start with the sensory division.
The sensory division has to do with your senses. That's how it got its name. Its job is to detect stimuli. You know, stuff like pain and pressure, temperature, and smell. After it does this, it transmits an impulse to the CNS, where the impulse is processed. The division contains 5 receptor types, which are classified by the type of stimuli they detect. These receptors are the mechanoreceptors, the thermoreceptors, the photoreceptors, the chemoreceptors, and the nociceptors.
The mechanoreceptors detect mechanical changes like touch, pressure, vibrations, and stress. Mechanical changes usually involve some kind of physical stimulus. When you hear mechano, think mechanical.
Thermoreceptors detect changes in temperature. This is easy to remember because thermo sounds like thermometer.
Photoreceptors are responsible for detecting changes in light. Photo is another word for light, so you shouldn't have any problem memorizing this either.
Chemoreceptors detect soluble chemicals. When you hear chemo, think chemicals.
And finally, nociceptors are specialized to detect physical pain.
Every reflex arc has 5 components: a receptor, a sensory neuron, an integration center, a motor neuron, and an effector.
Receptors, which we've already talked about, detect stimuli.
A sensory neuron transmits an impulse to the central nervous system.
The integration center is located in the CNS and processes and interprets the stimuli.
The motor neuron transmits an impulse from the integration center to an effector organ.
And finally, the effector organ, usually a muscle, responds to the stimuli by contracting. Like when a hammer whacks your knee, the effector organ, the muscles around your knee, contract.
Whoa. You gotta go over that again.
Okay. 5 things happen in a reflex arc. 1. Say a skin receptor on your leg detects some stimuli, an insect. 2. A A sensory neuron sends an impulse to your central nervous system. 3. Somewhere in your central nervous system, let's say the spinal cord, sense is made of that impulse. 4. A motor neuron sends an impulse to a muscle in your arm. 5. Your arm moves, swatting away the pesky bug. Got it now?
Booyah!
Okay, we've got time for one more major chunk of your nervous system. That's the motor division of the peripheral nervous system. Check it out.
Guess what? You already know something about the motor division. Remember that motor neuron from the reflex arc? That's a part of the motor division. So the sensory division transmits impulses to the central nervous system, but the motor division transmits impulses from the central nervous system to muscles and glands in your body. The motor division has two subdivisions, the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system, which itself has two subdivisions. But hey, don't get stressed out about all the details.
The somatic nervous system is responsible for voluntary control of skeletal muscles. So, every time you pet a dog, every time you raise your hands to fight against evil, that's the work of the somatic nervous system.
The autonomic nervous system is in charge of the involuntary action of smooth and cardiac muscles. So the autonomic nervous system keeps tabs on involuntary regulation of organs, glands, and blood vessels. The autonomic nervous system can also be further broken down into two subdivisions, the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. We'll talk about the sympathetic division first.
Yes, the sympathetic division kicks in during exciting, adverse, or threatening stimuli.
You're about to play a big game of basketball with some chicken cowmen. You're excited, but also a little scared.
This is known as the fight or flight response. Do you even your fears and take flight? Or do you fight the good fight? And stay in a good long battle! Ah, it's a monster!
Here's what's happening. There's an increase in heart rate, blood pressure, and respiration. Interestingly, there's a decrease in digestion, which allows a lot of extra blood to flow to your skeletal muscles.
This prepares the body for swift and immediate action. Ow!
That's the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. There's also the parasympathetic division, which works in an opposite way from its partner. After the game, you'll feel rested, relaxed, and warm. The exciting, adverse, or threatening stimuli has come and gone.
You see, this division stimulates a gastrointestinal activity at a high level and also keeps heart rate, blood pressure, and respiratory rate at normal resting levels. And that warm feeling you're probably feeling on your skin right now is due to the fact that blood is no longer being diverted to your skeletal muscles and can flow freely to other areas.
So, you can see the difference between the autonomic and somatic nervous divisions. The autonomic divisions control things you didn't even know needed controlling. So when you think autonomic, think autopilot. But there is one other key way in which the somatic nervous division differs from the autonomic nervous division. The somatic division uses only one neuron to link an effector organ to the central nervous system, while the autonomic division uses a two-neuron chain.
You see, in the somatic nervous system, the cell bodies of motor neurons are located in the central nervous system. They're axons, the little branches that extend from the cell body. Well, these axons extend into spinal nerves and into the skeletal muscles they serve. So they use only one neuron per chain.
The autonomic nervous system uses two neurons. The first neuron in that chain is called a preganglionic neuron. The cell body of that neuron is found in the central nervous system, but the preganglionic neuron is connected to the second neuron by a preganglionic axon. The second neuron is called the postganglionic neuron. The cell body of the postganglionic neuron is located in a ganglion, which is a collection of neuron cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system. Then, the postganglionic neuron is connected to an effector organ by a postganglionic axon.
So that's another basic difference between the autonomic and somatic divisions of the motor division of the peripheral nervous system.
The peripheral nervous system can first be broken down into the sensory division or motor division. Then the motor division can be further broken down into the autonomic and somatic divisions. then the autonomic division can be divided into the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions.
Thanks for joining us today as we took a trip through your nervous system. I'm Christiana Knight. See you next time.
See if you can guess the phrase before time runs out. Here's a clue. It's part of the brain. Ready? Go. The answer is medulla oblongata. Congratulations if you knew the answer before time ran out. It's time for the answer to the pop quiz. We ask, which vegetable does the human brain resemble most? The answer is C, cauliflower. The general shape and size of a human brain is a close match to this tasty, mushy vegetable.
This is PBS. To order this or any other Standard Deviant School products, call 1-800-238-9669 or visit www.standarddeviants.org.